Welcome back to another episode of Scared in the Name of Science.
Hi everyone.
We're on episode 3, which is following on in a very similar vein from episode 2, which was on white ladies. Today we are going to be exploring from my research, I believe it is a rarer form called the Woman in Black. Just like the white ladies, this is a ghost that appears of a woman, but this time, you guessed it, dressed all in black.
Ooh.
With white ladies, there isn't a super cut and dry theory as to what causes them, but I do have a couple of thoughts behind this that I'll get into in the conclusion. With where we posited that the thought that white ladies, maybe there isn't a cut and dry cause, but like we can't define what causes a white lady because there's too many, and maybe we only looked at outliers. Mm-hmm. With the Woman in Black, the opposite is potentially true in that they are so mixed up with tales that are of physical, actual, real things that maybe the stories of ghosts of them aren't necessarily as true as we think, but we'll dive into that throughout the whole thing. And I will say, whereas there are loads of stories of white ladies, which we only dived into a handful last episode, there are not as many of women in black. So, yeah. But I will get started. So, imagine one day that you're having a drink in your local pub. There are wooden beams stretched out overhead with the white lime-slicked walls creating fun nooks and crannies. The locals all huddle in, and the regular boom of laughter and clinking of glasses breaks through the gentle quiet in a happy kind of way. You go to the bathroom at one point, and as you're washing your hands, out of the corner of your eye, you see a dark shadow, but when you look, it's gone, it's vanished. But as you leave that night and begin to stumble home, you glance back towards the pub and suddenly in the window see the figure of a woman, tall and silhouetted in black. But her face is shrouded in a dark veil and you can't tell her expression. You note that it's an old-fashioned black dress she's wearing, but when you glance away to pull out your phone and take a photo, she has mysteriously disappeared from the window, and you shrug, thinking nothing of it and putting it down to your ale-addled brain. This is a classic story for the Woman in Black sighting. Tall woman, black veil, black dress, and in every story I tell you today, that is going to come up again and again and again. This dark shadow, a woman's figure with unintelligible features due to that heavy veil and black clothing. Now, I promise you, it's not just me running around the world because of my love of black clothing.
You're not tall enough.
It's referred to as the Woman in Black, and although Wikipedia states that she visits men who are conducting morally wrong behaviour, the accounts I found actually disagree with this and seem to link her closer to the Women in White from last week's episode. One thing that I have noticed as well is that the accounts do appear to very distinctly link the Women in Black with sad tales connected to children. Pretty much every single account I could find links to the death of that woman's child or children. They weren't involved in the act of killing them, but they were lost for several different reasons, which is kind of distinct from the Women in White, only that with the Women in White there appeared to be more of a distinct hardship to their death, but sometimes they were also the hardship in their life. So, yeah, that seems to be the clear difference there. So jumping straight in, the earliest mention of a woman in black that I could find was from Appalachian folklore. Now, I will preface this by saying that I could only find one distinct example, which I'll go into in a moment, but that is apparently where it stems from. Tales and stories in Appalachia are a massive amalgamation from foreign invaders, the British, the Spanish, the French, the native people who were already there, tales that came out of those that were brought over as part of slavery, all mixing together to create this really rich and vibrant tapestry of folk tales, legends, fables, things like that. And the earliest story that I could find, a book called A Ghost of the Southern Mountains in Appalachia, and the story goes that a young family were faced with the perils of childbirth. The husband tends to the home and garden whilst his wife struggles to recover from giving birth and bring round an ailing young babe that just isn't thriving. Each morning, the husband is visited by a woman in black who silently requests a cup of milk, which he happily provides. This story is significant as the earliest one I could find, as it mentions how her outfit specifically was dark and unsuitable for the time of year, and that he made a note of how she would be cold because she would wear no coat and only had on a black dress. Unfortunately, the man's wife and child pass away. However, the woman in black appears once more, asking for this cup of milk, and this time he decides to follow her. When he does, she disappears into a grave, so he grabs a friend and digs up the grave, which would never be my first thought, but crack on, lad. In the grave, he discovers a woman lying dead in that same black dress with the metal cup, but in her arms she's holding a live baby. His baby.
Oh, that's a bit weird.
Very weird. But again, this is an old tale, so how true it is, I don't know.
Side note, sorry. As disturbing as it is to dig up a live baby from a grave, I am being stuck on one particular of the story. How does one silently request a cup of milk?
So she would hold out this metal cup and shake it.
Yeah, milk?
It's a great question. I don't know. Maybe she sign languaged it, but no.
I'm sorry, that's such a strange thing to get stuck on.
I'm
trying to think of how someone would silently request a particular beverage.
But it is a valid point, but obviously being such an old folk tale, they don't sweat the details.
Fair enough.
I think the fact that we've got that detail about it being cold autumn and she's not wearing a coat is pretty impressive for an old folk tale, to be honest.
Definitely.
But this story is classic for a woman in black tale for several reasons. The black dress, the silentness of the apparition, also the creepiness of it as well. Can you think of any distinct differences or similarities to White Ladies?
Well, I mean, women in white do have that link with infanticide, but there is the reverse, well, almost the reverse in true here, when you find she's found with a live baby.
Yeah.
And I think that's quite a significant difference. I mean, we haven't really gone too deep into every single woman in white case and all of the links of infanticide, but it has been a running theme. So if we're seeing a woman in black with a live baby, that's quite an interesting contrast.
Indeed it is. So with this story, I couldn't find a specific date for it, but I believe it would be about around the 19th or 20th century. Reason why I wanted, if possible, to pick on a specific time period for this was because, as you mentioned in the last episode about the wearing white for your wedding, there is potentially a link here between the black dress and Victorian fashion trend as a symbol of mourning. So, inspired by your digging on clothes, I also went and looked at some Victorian fashions, because, actually it turned out that prior to the Victorian age, which was between 1837 and 1901, where Queen Victoria of England was on the throne, prior to that, the traditional colours of mourning were white and purple, which again could maybe then tie in with your White Ladies, because you theorised about it being the burial shroud. Could also be the people who did the murdering too, which might explain why some of it was like, why are you a ghost when you did all the bad things? But yeah, the traditional colours of mourning were of white and purple, and people who were rich tended to wear purple because it was an expensive cloth, whereas white was the most cheaply accessible cloth colour. Fun fact, even when black became popular as a mourning colour, children would still wear white to signify their purity and innocence.
Oh, that's really interesting. So, aside from the fact that Queen Victoria was clearly a bit of a fashion icon, it is interesting for the children to still be in white. That's got to have some significant links there, really.
Yeah. Definitely could do. So yeah, black, as you kind of alluded to, became popularised by Queen Victoria when she made the decision to wear black for the rest of her life after her husband passed away. This then became the standard for the West to emulate in order to show high status, because they were trying to look like royalty. And thus wearing black as a mourning dress became more and more popular to the point where it is now standard in modern day to wear black to a funeral or to show you're mourning. If you think of footballers, they will now wear a black armband to signify a death or in commemoration of something. So, in theory, if women in black are known because of their mourning veils and the black dress, then they must hark from the Victorian period. It would not make sense for ghosts prior to that period of time to show up in black outfits. So, yeah, I think that's a really important distinction to make in terms of time periods, is that we have to look at the things that they are wearing in order to be able to link them accurately to where they come from. Now, there is a part of the law that I have to mention for the women in black. It is a bit tricky to discuss correctly, but it is a valid part of the law around women in black. So to admit it would not be being honest and truthful to the history and to the science behind this. In black stories became popular around the turn of the 19th century, partly due to this change in fashion, but actually because there's a lot of theories that the majority of these sightings were actually fake and were false sightings, not of ghosts, but of people. So, in America, during 1860 to 1929, there was a massive crime wave of people committing crimes whilst wearing a long black veil and a black dress. Crimes like assault, inducing panic, menacing threats, armed robbery, pickpocketing, burglary, kidnapping, arson, murder, and one which was incredibly shocking to Victorians then, but is more normal today, cross-dressing, which is what they called it back then. Since widows and mourning dress were hardly uncommon in that period of time, the disguise was used so that people could get away with various crimes but still remain anonymous. No one would think to question the person in mourning dress, because to do so would be incredibly inappropriate and disrespectful. And if there's one thing we know that Victorians love, it's modesty and propriety. So since widows weren't questioned, I think it's really fascinating as well that there's this theory that a lot of people who were women in black during that period of time might have been people experimenting with their gender identity, using the protection of the widow's veil as a way to explore their true self without getting caught and potentially arrested or worse. Unfortunately, this was a crime back then, so it could land people in a lot of trouble. And that's sort of where a good question comes out for this. Could the tales of women in black that were so common during this period of time actually have spawned out of the legal cases instead of actual hauntings? This could explain why the women in black are so much rarer than white ladies and haven't seemed to continue to this day, unlike sightings of white ladies.
That's really interesting to go into. What I think is also a potential kind of additional link with this is if these crimes are happening at night or whatever, it is also aiding in being undetected.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure that's, it's why a lot of, when you think of burglars and, that kind of criminal activity, I think even modern day perceptions tend to be dark clothing to try and conceal identity.
Definitely, yeah. I wonder if there's a link there.
Yeah, especially with moving around in the dark.
Yes. I will say, as one of my favourite examples, though, of crimes that were committed whilst people were wearing the widow's veil and dress, was that they would go to a funeral of like an elderly gentleman as like a mourning widow, and then when they would go up to the coffin, because it'd be an open casket, especially in America, that was very popular, they would like fling themselves down onto the casket, covering the upper body with their veil, pretending to like sob and cry hysterically, and then swipe any jewellery that was in the coffin and just make out.
Jeez.
Wild. Now, we couldn't discuss the phenomenon of women in black without mentioning the incredible, fantastic, and amazing book and play by the same name. More recently, in modern age, turned into a film featuring the incredible Daniel Radcliffe. The story details how a young lawyer goes to deal with a deceased client's papers and discovers an intricate story where a woman in black haunts him and predicts or causes the death of a child. Now, it's not necessarily stated whether she does cause the death, but essentially, when she is seen, a child will die. And I will leave that to there because there's several instances of this happening, and it does change between book, play, and film as to what happens. I highly recommend going to see this play, though, if you haven't already. It is, for a two-person, maybe three-person play, is incredible how they stage it. But like with actual cases of the woman in black, this story is full of sadness and some fear, and again, centers on the connection between the women and the children once again. So, yet again, we've got another distinct connection that differentiates the women in black from white ladies, because that connection is there are always children connected with women in black, as opposed to with white ladies where there is sometimes children connected. We've looked at the cultural, we've looked at the law, so let's have a look at some actual cases. The first one that I could find was referenced on strangehistory.net, another really great website. In 1882, several dead babies were found, and before each discovery, a tall woman dressed in black was seen skulking around the area where the child was then found. Although there's no connection between the woman and the babies beyond the circumstantial, the theory runs that this woman would enter a churchyard, place a parcel on the ground, and then leave, leading to the thought that she was a baby farmer, again from the Victorian kind of period of time. Not exactly necessarily a ghost, but it does again prove this evidence of linking women in black to children. However, when we start scouring the paranormal database, we find few brief accounts of women in black sightings. They are not popular, they are hard to find, and the detail is limited. The first one links to the King's Arms public house in Abergavenny, where a figure has been seen moving down the staircase and passing through the dining area in the 1970s. However, there is no description beyond it being an old woman and one dressed in black. So it is difficult to pinpoint or confirm more details about this, as the pub has been standing in one form or another since the 16th century, and there aren't a lot of records regarding this. Fun fact, there is another ghost linked to this particular pub, which is that of a scullery maid who has been seen wandering around the pub. These two sightings are likely to be not connected, but it's interesting that there is more than one ghost and could be worth a future investigation for us. Maybe we should go and have Sunday dinner there or something.
Yeah, definitely. Sounds good.
In another fun quirk, which I think is just wild, like a little bit of serendipity, the King's Arms pub has also been known to be home to Abergavenny's Death Cafe too. So I do wonder if that charges up the ghosts and maybe will have an impact on its history in the future.
Sorry, Death Cafe?
Sure. So a death cafe is where people go to work through and process their grief having lost somebody.
Oh, I see. Well, that's quite nice.
Yeah, it's also where you can go if you have a fatal condition, and you can go and process your feelings and emotions with it and things like that. It's a really lovely, slightly morbid sentiment, and apparently it is really, really helpful in dealing and processing with grief.
Fair enough.
Yeah, so I'm just curious to know if that does have an impact, and if so, what? The second instance I can find of a woman in black, again, is super duper brief, but whilst driving on the A40 heading towards England, the driver of a coach believed that he had hit a woman dressed all in black with long hair. Startled and scared, the driver and a colleague got out to inspect what had happened, but could find nothing, no sign of hitting anything whatsoever. However, when they spoke to a friend later on, that friend had reported similar incidents to this. They'd heard stories of it and things like that. Now, there's no link in this one to children or reasoning for a ghost to be there, but it's definitely a weird one. And there is another case of this connected, but this one is a woman in blue rather than a woman in black. So again, this is what I mean about the rarity of these cases. They're hard to find and confirm and verify. But maybe this could be another drive after we check out Hosea Pope.
Definitely.
So this one brings me to my final woman in black Welsh story, and this one, like the others, is very difficult to verify. It's frustrating and just speaks volumes to the fact that it's so hard sometimes to classify these stories. So far, in my research, a woman in black can be defined as dressed all in black, has links to the area she is seen in, and usually has children linked to her stories in some manner. However, this one does not match that at all, and in my mind actually links better to white ladies. So why on earth is the story that she appears as a woman in black? This story takes place in a little town called Llanwit Major, and it has a ruinous castle there called Boverton Castle, and it still stands to this day. You can go and see it and drive past it like no problems. The building itself, Boverton Castle, is beautiful to behold, but the tragedy it is said to contain, it goes back a very, very long way. The story goes that the lady in black who haunts the area is the wife of King John, who was alive between 1166 and 1216, so the oldest case going back by a good couple of hundred years that we've discussed so far. The wife was named Hadwister, who was forced into exile when he tired of her and wanted to divorce and marry someone else. She had not been able to get him any children. She remained in the castle for many years, desperately in love with the king, until she died. And it wasn't until workers tried to restore the castle in the 19th century, note that date again, that they claimed to see a tall in black clothes. Faint crying noises are also said to be heard throughout the building, with the ghost of Hadwister being fond of placing her hand on people's shoulders, enjoying the fear she puts in them. So a couple of connections there. 19th century is a woman in black sighting, but this could date back all the way until like the 12th century. So a couple of things, but no clear connection to children. So a lot of differences. Now, here is where I get really frustrated, so please be prepared. This story, if you research even the tiniest thing about King John, is full of rubbish. Like, it's. I've got like 5 points on this, so I'll break it down. Firstly,
Can't wait.
The first wife of King John was not named Hadwister. She was named Isabella, Countess of Gloucester. So where Hadwister has come from, I haven't a foggy. Like, genuinely, no clue, cannot figure it out whatsoever. Maybe a nickname?
I don't think you get Hadwister from Isabel.
No idea. Genuinely haven't got a clue. Cannot find anything about Hadwister. Tons about Isabella, because she's like this lost queen. Fun fact, she was never actually crowned queen because they didn't consummate their relationship, apparently. But either way, who was Hadwister?
Oh, interesting.
Secondly, although Boverton Castle did fall within Isabella's lands, I actually couldn't find any historical record that she was confined to the castle for any period of time. Looking into the records, she was like exiled, but it didn't say anything about her being banished to this random ass part of Wales at all. So I don't know where that's come from. Thirdly, the point of that she remained in love with the king for the rest of her life. Well, actually, she remarried twice after she got divorced from the king. And from the research I found, it seems that hers and King John's relationship wasn't particularly friendly in the first place. That's why it was never consummated. That's why they divorced, because they weren't getting along at all and she couldn't produce any children. Fourthly, why would she only turn up as a ghost for the first time in the 19th century, during the peak of women in black, if Isabella passed away in 1217? Like, explain to me why there are not more accounts of this ghost haunting it in that like 600 years, 700 year period of time. That doesn't make sense to me. If she's such a strong ghost, why does she not turn up? You know, we've looked at other cases whether they turn up within like the first 50 years. Why is she taking so long to turn up? Why is she appearing as a woman in black? It doesn't make sense to me. And then finally, and linking to my last point, why would she be dressed in black if mourning clothes from the 12th century were white or purple if you were rich prior to the 1800s, and she dates from the 12th century? Like, none of it really makes sense when you do even like the tiniest little bit of scratching into the story. So while I do believe that there is definitely a ghost there, none of it really makes sense for it being the wife of King John, and I don't for a second think that that is legitimately who that ghost is. And I wish there was more research out there about Boverton Castle and who was actually in there. If anyone is able to clarify any of these points that I've raised or know more about it, please feel free to comment below, or even reach out to our email at scaredinthenameofscience@gmail.com, because I'm so frustrated that I can't corroborate any of this. I can't verify any of this. And every little bit of research that I seems to turn up more and more problems. The idea of this being former, not queen. You know what I mean? It's frustrated the hell out of me, I'm not gonna lie. That, like, this one really cool Welsh woman in black case, nothing. Nothing at all.
Do you think that there's a potential for her to be a mistress?
That would explain the Hadwister.
Fully grasping at straws, but it is, potential that Isabel's referenced in history, but Hadwister, a potential mistress, would not be.
That would make sense to why she was confined to such a remote place as well. But yeah, I get frustrated with stories like this where there isn't anything that proves it or even links it together. It just seems like utter rubbish, honestly. And why circulate stories like that? I don't get it. But that's the science logic part of my brain going like, cool, if it's not true and it takes 30 seconds to check it out, stop spreading it. Like,
I mean, you could say the same for modern day gossip, really. There's, I suppose there's multiple reasons. It could be gossip, could be a fable. I mean, a lot of things when you're considering the paranormal is broadly unprovable and potentially nonsense. And most of if you like telling a story and you like listening to stories, it's a story that's what grabs your attention, not necessarily the truth.
And I guess storytelling is such an innate part of humanity as well, that do we need to know the truth and the evidence behind it? But damn it, I like it. I want to know the truth. But yeah, so to conclude, I think we can definitely identify that the woman in black is a phenomena that strongly originated from around the turn of the 19th century and is stylized, therefore, by the Victorian clothing of that period of time. These apparitions don't seem to talk or interact with people now, but rather take the paths they trod in their actual lives back in the day. With the most reputable stories, there are clear links to children, but all of these stories are sad and laced with tragedy. And I think that is the safest we can sort of put as a category for the women in black.
I agree with that assertion. Just a quick question that's might be a bit loaded, but do we think that the reason that both women in white and women in black are so intrinsically linked with children, do we think that's because it was simply a woman's role in society at that time and therefore would have been an inescapable portion of their lives? Or
that's definitely a really good thought behind it. And I think with the fact that children and childbearing, marriage, loyalty to husbands was that is what defines a woman up until more recent times. It makes sense that a lot of these stories are going to be linked with that story of it going wrong or it being injustice against them and things like that. That definitely is a strong possibility because for such a long time, a woman's worth was her womb. So yeah, could be strongly linked 100%. There. I'd be interested to see if this keeps coming up as we do more and more research into different apparitions.
Definitely, it would certainly be quite telling of societal kind of standpoint at the time if every single time we do look into a more traditionally female associated ghost, childbirth and children are referenced, because I have a feeling that is what's going to be the case.
Definitely be.
Okay, so with that, if you could let us know your thoughts and feelings regarding the women in black in the comments, and use hashtag Sitnos, SITNOS. If you have any thoughts or any videos or anything you think will be interesting or would like to bring to our attention or discuss with us. And if you want to answer any questions we've posed today in the comments below, we would love to see your opinions and hear any feedback.
I'll see you in the next one.
Thank you very much, guys.